Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 118. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
It's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ, or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday, or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're my World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
Well, it's another Saturday.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
It's 6 o'clock.
I already did my time. I paid.
It's time for Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time.
I've got some special guests I'm going to be introducing to you very, very shortly indeed.
Time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish.
You just got to bear with me while I get this launched all over the world, worldwide.
I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet.
Don't forget, as soon as you get this, start sharing it. Start sharing it all over the world.
Change, man. Don't need no gun in my hand.
We deal with police brutality, unlawful killing, wrongful convictions.
Jail. Trying to cope with this living hell.
We pull no punches on World Jam Global Radio and Issues Today. Coming out to you live from Coventry, the United Kingdom.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison. Prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime.
Theme of today's show is Freedom Calls.
Did my time.
And we're going to be talking to the wife of Chris Helton.
My time.
That's Shannon Helton.
Already did my time.
And law attorney Mel Black. This is a man that should be free. He should be free to go home to his family.
Did my time.
But due to the incompetence of the justice system, this man remains in jail.
I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back.
We're talking about it here live on World Jam Global Radio.
They live like an ordinary.
You can find us on Liveline on radio. Find us on the Radio Guide, TuneIn.com, and www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet.
You can catch us on Facebook Live.
All over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet.
On liveonlineradio.net/UK/worldjamglobalradio.htm.
Being no gangster, life is too short.
RadioGuide.fm internet. That's World Jam Global Radio.
Already.
At TuneIn.com. Radio World Jam Global Radio. And on Facebook Live.
Paid for my crime.
Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Let's share this across the world.
Paid for my crime.
And let's just make sure no stone is left unturned in our pursuit of justice.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I've also been in communication with Chris Helton.
Statements are going on right now.
And I'll be looking at some of the things that the messages that and emails that he's sent me over the last few weeks. He's got a bit to say even from behind his prison walls.
Trying to cope with this living here.
Just giving you time to get yourself settled.
Trying to cope with this living here. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
We've just got one more show next week.
Yeah. This living here.
Before I take a 2-week holiday out to the Caribbean.
My time. I paid for my crime.
But please, stay tuned into World Jam Global Radio and keep your eyes peeled for issues today. And we've got shows booked up right until the end of this, August.
In heaven, give us this day.
Inundated with issues relating to our human rights.
Give those who trespass against us.
I'm in the middle of negotiating for a United Nations director to represent right here on World Jam Global Radio.
Ever and ever. Amen.
In challenging the United States of America and the way it manages its justice system. How difficult it is to get people exonerated who have not committed a crime.
All those drive.
And how difficult it is to get justice for those who lose their loved ones. To trigger happy police officers who have nothing better on their minds than death.
Me off my back so I can get my life on.
Please stand by.
The right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my.
As we look at the Chris Helton
statewide
case,
worldwide.
Freedom Calls.
Knives stop stabbing each other. Yeah.
And please use the comments on Facebook or the chat room on the World Jam Global Radio website, or any of the chat rooms or comments that are available on all of the sites that this is now launching on live right across the world. It's the Free Chris Helton Show, and it's about freedom calls. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you've got anything that you want to share in regards to this particular case, please feel free to just drop it into the comments. We'll see it. We'll pop it up and bring it into the conversation as and when we do see it. Now, without no further ado, I've got two wonderful guests who's been sitting down in the sidelines waiting to come on with some stories to tell. First, let's just go on to Mel Black, who is the attorney who represented Chris Helton just after he lost his appeal. But I'll let him do the introductions, and he can tell you the role that he played and everything that went with that. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, Mel Black, wherever you might be, sir.
We're in the early afternoon over here, Kervin, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's just gone 6 o'clock here in the UK, so I think you're about 5 hours behind us. But it's a wonderful day. The sun is shining. But I couldn't think of a better time to talk about the issues relating to and pertaining to the incarceration of Chris Helton. If you'd just like to do a quick introduction for us, Mel, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how long you've done it for, and then we'll go on to Shannon and we'll come back to you, yeah?
Fine. I'm 74 years old. I was born and raised and educated in Florida. I went to the University of Florida undergraduate, and I came home to go to law school at University of Miami. I worked in a Volunteers in Service to America after I graduated, with a stint helping people in community organizing. Then I worked for the Legal Services of Greater Miami, which was a program to provide legal assistance to people on civil cases who could not afford counsel. I then worked as a public defender in the Dade Public Defender's Office, representing people accused of crimes who could not afford counsel. It's a government agency, and I worked there for 4 years. And then I went into private practice in 1976 after 7 years of working in various public agencies. And I've been doing criminal trial work in both federal and state court since 1976 as a solo practitioner. And I'm semi-retired at this point.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And how long have you represented Chris Helton, Mel?
You know, I'm not sure the exact date I got involved. Chris had been tried and convicted in Key West for a 1991 charge. He had gone up on appeal. He called me while his appeal, he had gotten a preliminary order that they were going to reverse his case. And that would have been about 1994, I think. And I told him I would be willing to talk to him about representing him if he got a new trial. The Court of Appeals ultimately issued an initial opinion that basically said that he needed to be released and dismissed, his charges dismissed, because they found, 3 judges found that the evidence was insufficient to support a conviction under Florida law because the case was a case of circumstantial evidence. There was no direct evidence and no physical evidence to support the conviction. It was based upon an inference, and under American law, when there's a circumstantial evidence case, if there's a potential hypothesis, reasonable hypothesis of innocence, and it's not excluded by the evidence, then there's a rule of evaluation, interpretation of evidence requires an acquittal. That opinion came out, and then on a rehearing, the state petitioned for rehearing, and on rehearing, the court reversed itself and changed its interpretation of the application of circumstantial evidence rule. And it was there are 3 judges in the appellate court. 2 of them voted that way, and 1 voted, Judge Nesbitt voted against changing the circumstantial evidence evaluation. And moreover, he said that based upon the evidence, he saw reason to reverse because the trial lawyer had not presented expert evidence regarding the stomach contents information which had been provided by the medical examiner at autopsy. And he suggested that the stomach contents indicated that death had occurred hours before Chris Helton had come home. So after that, Chris filed a petition under Florida law to have his conviction vacated for a new trial based upon the fact that his trial lawyer had not submitted this scientific evidence, and there was a claim that the counsel had been ineffective. Chris asked me, even though I don't do that kind of work, he asked me to get involved and help him in the drafting of that petition. I did do some work with him. It was filed, it was denied, and then there was a petition filed in federal court because there are 2 levels of review. The federal habeas corpus was initially granted by the trial court. It was affirmed on appeal in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and then they came back and reversed themselves, saying that there had been a technical defect in terms of the timing of the petition. And as a consequence, they reversed themselves and reversed the trial court's decision to grant habeas corpus, and his conviction became final. That was only the beginning, because after that we appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and then we proceeded, we filed motions to try and get DNA testing, which was denied on the basis that the court felt that DNA was not going to be something that could exonerate him. There was further petitions filed by Chris. He represented himself, and I consulted with him. I did work with him through the years. And most recently, I represented him in an effort to get something called, I represented him at the parole hearing. He became eligible for parole after 25 years in custody on the charge that he had. We lost there, and we also filed a request from the prosecutors to review the case, not on the basis of a due process issue, but on the basis of the fact that, you know, he's innocent. And we set forth our reasons for that claim, and it's a discretionary decision from prosecutors when it's not something that the court's involved in. The prosecutors have a duty under their canons of ethics to go back and look at cases if they feel that there's been an injustice and an innocent person is in custody. They have the power to petition the court to set aside the conviction. And that's where we stand right now.
If I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an issue at the time where you was representing him, and it was the technicality was just some documentation that wasn't filed in time because you had been going through a situation yourself. I think a family member was ill, and I'm not sure. Can you just refresh my memory on that and
Sure.
Take us through that?
Well, in fact, my father had passed away around that time, and I was involved with that. But there was another issue, and that was the way the statute of limitations, the deadlines were framed, was ambiguous in my reading. There was a case out of New York that held that you have a year from the end of the state habeas proceedings. In other words, when you pursue habeas relief, post-conviction relief, you you begin with the state court. You have to exhaust your state court remedy, and then you have a federal court remedy. Prior to the statute being amended with the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in 1996, you could bring successive petitions. You could bring them at any time, and they were trying to rein in the number of petitions that were being filed, and the language of the statute was not clear that as to when the time frame started to run. There was a case out of New York that said that you started to count from the end of the state habeas proceeding. We relied upon that, and unfortunately we were not correct.
Hello?
Hello, is that Keith has just joined us, I believe?
This is Keith Harris calling in. I'm the director of the Florida Justice League. Is everybody on? Sorry.
Yeah, we're all on and we're live at the minute. If you just hang fire, I'll come to you very shortly, Keith. I'm just in the middle of something with Mel at the minute.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, so Mel, just going back on to one other thing, because most of us were absolutely gobsmacked when we heard it the first time, and I just would like you to just talk us through this situation. So he was apparently exonerated or freed by Supreme Court judges, etc., and he still is not free. How is that actually possible?
Well, it has to do, number one, judges are conscientious and they review, they make a decision, and then they are open to reversing their decision on rehearing if the losing party raises issues that catch their attention. And so what we had here was that on his initial appeal, the Third District Court of Appeal, it's not the Florida Supreme Court, but it's the Third District Court of Appeal. It's an intermediary appellate court. They said that their opinion, 3-0, was that his conviction should be reversed and he should be discharged because the evidence was insufficient. On rehearing, they took another look at how they applied the circumstantial evidence rule. Two of the judges said that they wanted to change their mind. The third dissented, but also added this issue about the potential that there had been ineffective assistance of counsel during trial. So that was one time where three judges had determined the evidence was insufficient, but they then changed their minds, and that was only one of those judges thought the evidence was insufficient, but he also thought that there should be a new trial based upon the fact that the stomach contents had not been presented. On the federal habeas, you had a federal district judge who conducted a 2-day evidentiary hearing and then wrote a lengthy opinion in which he found that the trial counsel was ineffective, that the stomach contents evidence would likely have caused a jury to acquit him, to find that the evidence did not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On appeal, initially a 3-judge panel of the intermediary federal appellate court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, those 3 judges issued a preliminary opinion saying that they agreed, number one, that the petition was timely filed because of equitable circumstances, and furthermore, that the evidence, had it been presented at his trial, would likely have resulted in acquittal. On rehearing, after as they're allowed to do, they reviewed it again, and they determined that without pulling back their opinion that the evidence would have resulted in his acquittal, they said, we can't look at this, we don't have jurisdiction, and they reinterpreted how the court should look at the late filing and whether or not there was an equitable reason to allow the statute to have been told. So yes, it is kind of extraordinary. I don't think I've ever heard of a case where so many times an appellate court has on two different, both state and federal and a federal district judge have ruled in favor of a defendant either getting a new trial or being discharged, and it is taken away. So you can imagine the emotional roller coaster for Chris going through all of this.
Hey, just one more quick, because I do know, and please forgive me, Keith and Shannon, because I know you guys are holding fire in the sidelines, but Mel has only got half an hour, which only leaves him a few more minutes left before he's got to go, and I just wanted to try and maximize what I can get out of him before he goes, whereas I've got the rest of you guys for the rest of the hour and a half of the show. So just bear with me a minute. So, Mel, just one other thing, or a couple of other things, actually. Firstly, is there anything that you could have done different that might have brought about a different outcome for Chris in the way that you supported, managed, or dealt with his case?
Well, not relying on that New York case would have certainly made a world of difference. And I have to tell you, I've run into, through the years, many lawyers during that time frame when we were in transition under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. Many people did not understand that you needed to start counting from the date that for federal habeas purposes, you had 1 year from the date that the conviction became final. Interestingly, you have 2 years to file your state habeas under Florida law. So if a lawyer waits for 2 years to file the state habeas, are you still there?
I'm still here, mate.
Yeah, waits for 2 years to file the state habeas. He has already lost his federal habeas rights because they run from the same date. They only get told, the federal date gets told while there's a pending state habeas. So it's a very confusing area of the law. And, and really what strikes me is the essence of Chris's defense that was not put on at his trial really would have made a difference. Everybody has recognized that. You have the trial, the appellate judge, Judge Nesbitt, you have the federal district judge, you have the 3-judge panel. They wrote an opinion on it, but it's all based upon a procedural problem. And
based on that procedural problem, the fact that a technical clerical error was made, right? A man stays in prison for 20 odd years and more because of a clerical error.
I think that that's a fair statement, and it gets worse. And this is probably the big issue with American justice is, we, first of all, starting in the 1980s, parole became a bad word because there was some problems with the way the parole commissions operated, and it was abused, and they were, and there was a question about whether sentences really meant anything. So there was a movement away from parole, but I think like any pendulum, it swung too far. And parole would be a place where when there's an obvious injustice like this, where that could be corrected, or clemency where it could be corrected. But in Florida, the parole system has become unavailable to anybody charged with a non-capital offense after 1984 because they abolished parole. And the only people that are eligible for parole in Florida now are people who were sentenced before 1984, for offenses committed before 1984, or people who were sentenced for life without parole for 25 years, the old capital felony statute. So we have a limited number of people in Florida who are on parole eligible, and the parole commission, the numbers of how many people are given parole is really very parsimonious. Very few people are getting parole. So, the possible safety valves for people who are caught in the situation where Chris Helton is caught, they're not very available. Clemency, likewise, under some administrations, it's a discretionary matter, and in the state law, Florida clemency law is not being liberally applied, and there are very few commutations and very few pardons given in Florida. So it's a pretty difficult landscape for Chris Helton.
Here's the thing, right? The one place where transparency, thoroughness, integrity, and all of these things should really stand firm and be apparent is in the justice system, and where mistakes are made, the first thing that you would imagine that they'd want to do is put it right, especially if it's a clear-cut mistake. Nobody wants to see innocent people go to prison, just as we don't want to see innocent people who are not in the pursuit of criminal activity shot down dead on the streets by police officers who are too trigger happy to really truly investigate what's going on before they pull their guns out. But we seem to have a continuous repetition of this kind of behavior in wrongful convictions and unlawful killing by law enforcement that seems to be compounded by the way that the justice system treat those that come into the system once they've been arrested or come through. What do you think could be done at this, in this late stage to try and force the hand of the judicial system to rethink what they're doing, how they're doing it, and the implications of the people's lives that they're impacting in such a negative and powerful way?
You got a couple of hours, I can tell you, Kervin. And I need to borrow a soapbox from you. I've been practicing for close to 50 years now, and I still believe that the American judicial system is a good system. Unfortunately, there are it waxes and wanes in terms of the quality of justice that is being delivered. In my early years, we were in the civil rights era, and there was an open, expansive feeling. That was the spirit of the time. Courts were receptive to new thinking, and sentences were meted on the basis of mercy and justice. Unfortunately, there was a lot of crime proliferating in the United States during the 60s and 70s. In the 80s, the top came off in Florida. It was really a wild, wild west situation. And so the legislative response and the prosecutorial response has been to try and toughen the laws, take away what they deem to be loopholes, which I deem to be escape hatches for innocent people. So that has been a movement for a long time. And the result is that the United States has maintained its excellence as the greatest incarcerator in the world. Per capita, we have more people in jail than any dictatorship or any country that you could name. And Florida happens to have one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. So voters don't say we demand justice, but legislators think that it's a safe place for them to vote when they're in the legislature to harden the laws against people accused of crimes. Now, is there a potential change? I see the storm clouds gathering for some change here. I think that there's a growing attention to the problems of mass incarceration, both in terms of the damage to the lives of the people who are incarcerated, to the families of the people who are incarcerated, to society where we essentially keep people in so long that they're institutionalized by the time they come out, where we give no rehabilitation to people while they're in custody, guilty or not guilty. That is now gathering attention in the United States, and I hear more and more people talking about the need to to move back, to dial back the rate of incarceration. Of course, it's so expensive to incarcerate people and instead of rehabilitate people. So I see that there needs to be and this is not good for Chris Helton, but it's good for the justice system, that there is a sense that we're moving to dial back some of these harsh attitudes that the system expresses towards people who have good innocence claims. So I'm optimistic over the long haul. As far as Chris Helton is concerned, we're continuing to push hard. He's a brilliant, this is not to demean him, he's a jailhouse lawyer, but he's brilliant. And he is very dogged and positive in his pursuit, and I'm still trying to help him.
Well, I'd like to thank you for that brief introduction, or that long introduction, actually. We seem to have lost Keith again for some reason. He's just gone off the call. Are you there, Shannon?
I think he's still there. Is Chris there?
I'm here.
No.
Keith?
Keith is gone, but Shannon is still here. But if you can hang on for just a little while, Mel, just want to bring Shannon in a bit. Shannon,
okay.
You've heard what Mel has had to say about the legal system as such.
Yeah.
But it must be very frustrating from where you sit, that the man whom you love, who you believe to be absolutely, totally innocent, is still, so to speak, rotting away in a penitentiary somewhere.
It's extremely frustrating from every angle. And not only that, but now we're getting faced with Florida trying to take our visits away from us, so we wouldn't even be able to visit as well. And so it just gets more and more frustrating every day.
So how helpful has Mel been for you as an attorney trying to work towards this battle of trying to help Chris get to freedom?
Very important. He is our rock. Without him, we couldn't have gotten as far as we have. And Chris, I mean, he's been dealing with this a lot longer than I have. I was off the scene for a little while. We grew up together in high school years, and then we lost touch for a long time and then got back in touch. And I'm very grateful that Chris has had Mel to help him through this time.
We're going to go back to those earlier years. You've been working with Shannon, Mel, for some time now, I would imagine. How do you guys communicate with Chris, or communicate Chris's desires to the world?
Well, I have, Chris has had a website and a following of people that are advocating for him. I have not been involved in that. I've focused my efforts on the technical stuff, doing the research. I prepared a lengthy presentation to the state attorney in Key West, where he was originally prosecuted. And I will tell you, they sought that review because Chris sent them. Chris is very dogged, and he did the research. He found out about the wonderful work on exoneration being done in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office by a DA named Thompson. And he wrote to the elected official in Key West and said, you all ought to take a look at this, and I would like you to take a look at it through the lens of me. And the next thing I know, I didn't know he'd sent the letter. I got a call from the chief assistant who said, we've decided we'd like you to make a submission to us. So that submission was started in 2015. We finally filed it in 2016. And they were giving a review with the idea of maybe releasing Chris based upon his being actually innocent. That's the standard that they were looking at it under. And unfortunately, the prosecutor that was looking at it and doing the work, he passed away unexpectedly. We had to reset, and we got the newly elected state attorney. There was an election in between, so we had to reset and start over again. The new state attorneys designated somebody to take a look at it. We have had some conversations that have not been very satisfying, but we're still working in that direction. But Shannon, I will say, is on top of it. She's always in touch with me. She communicates what Chris is asking me to do. I talk to Chris in attorney-client phone calls where I call through his counselor. And, he drafts pleadings, and, I'll give him my objective view of them.
Well, in my communications with Chris over the last few weeks or so, he's made it perfectly clear the work that he does selflessly while he's been incarcerated, helping others to put the cases together as a paralegal himself. And he's gotten past all of his degrees and bars, etc. And if he was to be freed today, I would imagine that he would have the license to defend somebody himself, wouldn't he?
I don't think he would have the license because he would have to go through the Florida bar to get a license, but he certainly has skills that any appellate lawyer would like to have him doing some paralegal work with them, doing summaries of transcripts, doing legal research, coming up with strategies, and drafting pleadings. It's really amazing. Chris has gotten a lot of folks their freedom, and it's ironic that, his bad luck.
He still hasn't got his.
Yes, yeah. Really, it's a cruel irony.
It is. Now, I don't know how much longer you can stay with us for, Mel, but I think it's imperative that we go over some things to give the audience a greater understanding of exactly what we're talking about. And maybe we can start off before we start talking about the old Chris. Let's talk about we can talk about what got him to this point, because I think it's pertinent that we do that now, seeing as we've gone all around it, and it's almost as if we've skirted around it and left it out. But the allegation was quite a heinous allegation. It was a very terrible. I mean, nobody would want to be associated with this type of crime. So I would imagine that it comes with great pain to come alongside somebody and support somebody if you didn't actually think that they were innocent, because it's not it's not like oh well, you went out and stole a couple of loaves of bread or whatever, and well I think he's innocent, because it really doesn't matter whether he's innocent or not. You just love the guy so much. It's the type of crime that if he was found to be guilty or it was proven that he was guilty, supporting him would almost be your downfall. So let's talk about what the crime was, because it was an absolutely terrible thing that he was accused of. But the circumstances around that takes us up a different avenue. So I don't know whether you want to start, Mel, or you want to come in now, Shannon, and just talk about what was the charges against him and the scenario that led to him being implicated.
Shannon, do you want me to talk about this?
Sure.
Okay. Well, Chris was living in Key West, which is an island community about 150 miles south of Miami. There's a long string of natural keys or islands, and there's a causeway that runs all the way down about 80 miles, runs all over. It's over 100 miles. It runs all the way down to Key West, and he was working. He was a very computer literate guy. He had worked as a county employee trusted county employee for a good while, and he was involved in, I believe, selling computer-related and office-related products. He was a member of the community, was active in the community, he was involved with some service organizations, and he was a known commodity in the community. He met a woman. She had 2 children. He moved in with her, and she lived up north of Key West in Little Torch, I believe. She lived on Little Torch Key, and he was living in that house. She had a 2-year-old child, and one night, Chris and she had another child living there too, in this house in Little Torch. Chris went out working. One day he came home at about 9:30 at night. She advised that the youngest child was asleep, that she'd put him asleep. Chris and his fiance stayed up until about 11 o'clock. She went to sleep at about 1 o'clock, and these are estimates. I don't have the specifics in front of me. She woke up. She came in and said that her son was missing. They both looked for the child and found the child deceased in front of the house at the foot of the stairs. And they called the police, they called rescue, and the police focused their interest on both of them, and they ended up charging him based on no admission, no statement, no physical evidence. They accepted her denial that she had been involved. I see Mr. Harris back on here.
Yes, I've noticed that. I've just been trying to send him a message.
Right. So, it was a child, a 2-year-old child who's had been killed by a blow to the back of his head. And it was a horrific, anybody that thinks of it and realizes it's a horrific situation. But in terms of the evidence, it was a circumstantial evidence case. And it begged for somebody to be accused. In any event, the trial took place very quickly after he was arrested. The trial lasted 1 day. His trial lawyer did not present any expert testimony regarding stomach contents. The autopsy showed that there was an undigested meal in the child's stomach, which under the normal stomach emptying, it would have been gone within an hour. If the child was put to bed at 6 o'clock, there would not have been any food left in the child's stomach at the time that Chris came home, much less after 11 o'clock. So that speaks pretty strongly to the idea that the child was dead before Chris ever came home.
One of the intriguing things was that the child, having searched for the child all inside of the house, the child was found outside of the house. How would that be possible? How would the child get outside the house?
Well, the evidence that was presented by the state seemed to rule out the possibility that the child had left the house on his own. They also argued that nobody else had come into the house because of the way the door is locked. And so the implication was that somebody had taken the child outside of the house and either had killed the child outside or had taken the body outside after the child was killed. That was the implication.
According to the autopsy results, the force that crushed his skull was similar to that of being in a car crash or a fall from a 30-story building.
Yes. Yes.
And yet they wanted to. Yeah, go on.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't.
I was just going to say, but yet they still want to be convinced that Chris Helton was able to do that himself. That would, I mean, the force. They said that it is possible that he crushed his skull by stamping on his head. That's the insinuation. But that would have been some crush. That would have been some stamping of the head.
Well, go ahead.
I have contacted Dr. Wright, who is a forensic specialist.
Shannon, can I stop you a minute? Are you outside somewhere? Because your signal is very terrible, and it's. Are you outside?
I'm in a car.
Right. Okay. There's a lot of noise going on here, and we're not hearing you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you a bit better. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I contacted Dr. Wright, a forensic specialist, and I contacted a toxicologist. I can't remember his name at the moment, but they both agreed that because the yogurt in the stomach content was still fresh, gooey, and pink, that the child died within minutes. The mother already admitted that she was battling, so to speak, with the child when she was trying to feed him. Well, Dr. Wright, when he did his report and went over everything, he said he believes that she grabbed the child by his arm and swung him, and his head possibly hit the table or some other object.
And so that would have been a really, really forceful blow.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Chris and the mother of the child.
Well, from what I understood, he wanted to leave her before this ever happened, but he kept staying because of the three children. There was a 6, a 4, and a 2-year-old, and he was staying for them because she was known to harm them. And there's evidence also that she was drugging the children. So, he just kept staying for the children, trying to figure out what he should do when this happened.
Well, we're going to go back into how you first knew Chris and how you rekindled that relationship and why you're so convinced of his innocence very shortly. But Keith has been trying to get on the line for some time now. Let's bring in Keith Harris.
Sure.
How are we doing, Keith?
Good. I just happened to be traveling up to Tallahassee right now, getting ready to prepare for a parole hearing. So I was listening to Mel Black and, of course, everything dealing with Chris. And I represent inmates on parole in the state of Florida, and it's the most horrific thing I've ever done in my life. We're dealing, like Mel said, I want to reiterate some things about the Parole Commission first, and I want to really quickly touch on how I met Chris and how I'm involved now in his case.
Yes, you go ahead. You go ahead, Keith.
So I'll start first with the historical. I met Chris in prison in the law library where he's a law clerk and I was a law clerk. And I was the first law clerk in the state of Florida to have the option of traveling around the state to get to teach other inmates how to become a certified law clerk because of a lawsuit that came down. So my history stretches way back into the days when we had books and we had to use our books to research and do shepherdizing and all these great tools we had in books. Today, thank God, we have computers and I don't have to blow the dust off of them. So I met Chris along the way, and by then I had already gained an incredible knowledge of the law because not only getting twice certified, I got a paralegal degree, and then I started practicing. I got to practice law in Florida inside prison. I actually held trials, and I won 2 Supreme Court decisions my own in my name to get the law changed in the state of Florida. One is a recent opinion out of the first DCA against the Parole Commission because I was a wrongful conviction of the Parole Commission.
Okay.
So I had to get my own self out. And today, if I didn't do that and didn't know the law like I do and continue to get people out of prison like I am, which I'm running a very great company in the state doing this, I would be stuck into the year 2038. So along the way, I met Chris and got to know him, living around him and working around him. And I never, ever could detect anything about this guy that even closely resembled some of the other people that I lived around in prison that did belong there for these crimes. So I immediately garnered, understanding what his case was, nailed it down. Listen, the bottom line is this. The courts in Chris's case tell us there is no evidence showing that he did it. Now, we know the child's dead, but there is just no evidence showing that he did it. There's more evidence showing that the mother did it, that anybody did it. All that's come out, it's in beautiful researched opinions by judges that have the most beautiful education. And you hear these stories about how this guy slipped through the cracks. No, this is a case where the justice system has brought to light the truth about this case. And now getting it before the parole board is another challenge that could take who godly knows how long, because the parole commission today, and I have made it to this status before these people for the past 3 years as a qualified parole representative, are the harshest, most cruelest people I have ever met in my life. And I was in prison, in close security prisons in the state of Florida, and met killers that were not as cruel as these people are in Tallahassee.
One of the key pieces of evidence for me is that police never found any blood or any other evidence directly linking Chris to the death.
Nothing. There's nothing linking him to the death.
You would have imagined that with so little evidence, the case was one of those that was odds-on favorite to be thrown out.
Listen, I'm a case where the evidence was manufactured to get me to violate my parole. And these people did not want to let me out, even when it was brought to their attention. I had to go through the whole proceedings of taking it all the way into the District Court of Appeal to prove my innocence.
And so therefore, you are somebody who's gone through what Chris is trying to go through now, and you realize...
And I go up there and represent inmates to get them out. Before these very same people that are doing these things, that are ignoring the truth.
So, have you worked alongside Mel Black at all in any of this?
No, I am... my work is very extensive, and I've been very unavailable to people because I spend 10 hours a day behind a computer, working on cases that I'm hired for. And I have the incredible thing that's happened. I've garnered the respect of 4 very well-known lawyers here in the state of Florida because of my work. But I can tell you the horrors of the system are incredible, and I'm emotional about it. Excuse me about that, but the pain is still there from the years I had to endure from the mistreatment that goes on in there and the misjustice. It's horrible.
I just want to go back and draw in Mel Black if I can, because during the trial, Mel, you argued that that food found in the boy's stomach during the autopsy provides an alibi for Helton, that the boy last ate at 6:30 that evening, and if, as jurors found, Helton had killed him some 5 hours later, after Marcy Gunderson went to bed, Marshall's stomach would have been empty.
Yes.
Okay.
That was Dr. Wright. I was writing what Dr. Wright and other experts have indicated.
And that the pathologist, John Fiegel, had said that he concluded the boy died within 2 hours of having that meal.
Right. Dr. Fiegel was the expert that we called at the hearing on the habeas corpus before Federal District Judge Norman Rutger in, I believe, about 1995, 96. I'm sorry, it would have been later, about 98.
I want to remind you, at that time, they were looking at things as if the intestines, they weren't considering that it was child intestines. Last year, when we looked into it, the difference in a child's intestines, the digestion would have been within minutes.
But the Assistant Attorney General argued about the undigested meal couldn't be used in itself to pinpoint the time he died because of the variables, including medicine that the boy took, the type of food that he was eating, and how that might affect or impact his digestion. Did you think that presented an enough argument to negate the defense of the alibi for Chris?
Well, that argument was presented. I think we lost Mr. Harris again. Oh, there he is. That argument was presented and opinion was given by Dr. Bell at the hearing on the 2255 habeas in front of the federal judge, and the judge rejected it. He said it didn't make a whole lot of sense given the testimony of Dr. Fiegel. More recently, the opinion of Dr. Wright, which was presented to the state attorney down in Key West, added another nuance, and that had to do with the presence of Benadryl and the amount of Benadryl in the child's bloodstream. It was a very high dose, which and was the contributor to the color and the stomach contents. And Dr. Wright opined that indicated that could have cut off the digestion. Now, part of what was found in the stomach contents was undigested rice. Rice is a starch that starts digesting in the mouth and is almost completely digested shortly after it enters into the stomach. So all of these are factors that add to the strength of the opinion. Yes, stomach contents are subject to many variables, but in this case, the variables all point towards death prior to the time that Chris Helton came home.
Shannon,
yes.
You've known Chris since he was about 14 years old.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, it was well after he was incarcerated that you got in contact with him.
Yes, I had been trying to find him for a very long time. And when I finally did find him, because his stepmother had made a website about him, I was in shock. I was like, there is no working way that this boy did any of this. Contact with him immediately because I just wanted to be able to support him. And then shortly after we were married.
Yeah, again, because you're traveling en route, we are finding it very difficult to hear you clearly, consistently, and loudly enough. Kind of sorry about that because some of what you're saying is getting missed. But you really have a powerful contribution to make to this show, and I'd really like it if you could find a way to stop at some point and maybe just get yourself a really good signal so that we can complete this interview.
I'm in my driveway. I just came out to the car so the children wouldn't be making a lot of noise on the phone.
Right, okay. It's just that we've got a lot of traffic.
Could I interject?
Of course you can.
Can I interject for a second?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, come in, Keith.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get off the phone because I'm going to hit an area on the turnpike where I know I'm going to lose a signal.
Okay.
I wanted to add this, though, I think is really important for everybody to consider. The Florida Parole Commission rarely, if ever, grants a individual that has a life sentence with a 25-year mandatory parole release on their very first interview. And, of course, their very first interview here in the state of Florida, when you have that sentence, is at the completion of your 25-year sentence.
Wow.
So what this parole commission did, with some exceptions, is that they go back and they kind of retry his case to see what is it that they can use to make his parole date further away to appear as if he's never go no matter what Chris has done in the past 25 years in prison, positive, educational, vocational, rehabilitative, whatever he's done didn't matter. It mattered very little to them, and they didn't care. What they did, though, at his first hearing, was they said, well, we're going to put your release date right now at 2046 because it was a child that you killed. That's what they did. Now, I don't know how much the parole commission knows about his case, but they are getting a bucket load of it pretty soon because it's on its way up to them. There are some new initiatives going on that I'm not really privy to talk about right now because of the confidentiality. But there are things going on about this because the whole purpose of the parole commission is to find a way to presume that Chris and anyone that's eligible today that would become parole eligible, not to continue to retry their case and find all those things that you believe are bad in the case to keep him in there. And that's what they do. And they do it across the board in the state of Florida.
It's a real terrible position to find yourself in if you're the person that's there.
It is, because there's no sense of restorative justice. You know, the justice system, and Mr. Black will test to this, everybody knows it, is about arresting, incarceration, and then reentry. If we don't have a reentry process, then what's the point of just incarcerating anybody and having a parole board?
You know, I just want to rewind a little bit. Let's just go back a little bit, because the child is missing. The child is found dead. But from what I gather, from the information that I can see, Gunderson and Helton were together when they found the child. Is that correct?
That's what
yeah.
Right. That's right.
Right?
Yep.
So Helton helped find the child upon his return. So what evidence do we have as to what Gunderson was doing prior to Helton arriving? At what point did they notice that the child was missing?
She claimed that she woke up around 1 o'clock and went and looked in on the children. Now, the only evidence as to what she was doing before Chris came home is what she told the police. So, you know, this is a crime, obviously, when a child death occurs, it begs for somebody to be held responsible more than any other kind of crime. And so there was a lot of immediate emotional pressure to blame somebody.
Absolutely. I can get that. I just want to get to a couple of quick key points if I can. If Chris didn't get back till 9:30 and the child didn't get found outside until after 1 a.m., right? Did Chris see the child between 9:30 and 1 a.m. at all? Had he gone into the room for any reason?
No.
So he's come home from work. As I would, because I don't always go into my daughter's room. Sometimes my 9-year-old daughter might be asleep on a settee, because on the weekend she does, because she watches TV. That's a little treat. So she'll stay up and watch TV. And so if I come into work, and I finish at 10 o'clock when I do my late shifts, so I'll see her there. But if I'm going up to bed and I'm tired, it's very rare, unless her light is on, that I'll go into her room. I don't need to. My wife's in the house. My stepson's in the house, and because the lights are out and the house sounds all peaceful, I'll just go and get undressed and get into bed. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, what was it that initiated the search for the child in the first place?
Nothing. Just that she got up, she woke up, she went and checked on the kids, is what she said. That was what her testimony was.
Okay, so you'd question, wouldn't you? Was that something that you often did at 1 o'clock in the morning? Did you often get up at 1 o'clock in the morning to go and check on the kids? If you're home, your doors are shut, your husband's home from work, you're in bed, is that something that you would regularly do at 1 o'clock in the morning? Go and check on the kids, because that would insinuate, he was anticipating finding something wrong in the first place.
Right.
You know.
Right. Right.
I mean, I know I'm assuming here myself, but I'm just thinking layman's terms. You know, if Chris had done something, then wouldn't it be him that would be getting up to go and check to try and cover his tracks? Because I'm looking at it saying that the contents of a Kool-Aid spilled was lying on the kitchen floor. That's when she noticed that the front door was open. She stepped outside and she found the child lying face down on the front steps on a concrete slab.
Right. So this is her testimony, and the jury chose to accept her testimony and reject Chris's testimony. And that's what the Court of Appeals, when they had the rehearing on the original judgment to discharge him because the evidence was insufficient and there was a hypothesis of innocence, they said that when there's a credibility determination, that can remove a hypothesis of innocence, and they sort of left that to the jury to make that decision. So obviously somebody was not telling the truth in their testimony.
Also, I was told by somebody in the Keys who asked me not to use their name that she was a local. She had grown up there. They did not want to go against a local, so they chose Chris to go for because he was not a local. This is what I was told.
And you know, the funny thing is, as simple or as petty as that sounds, sometimes that's the difference between someone's life and death. That a local authority can just choose to take sides. Do you think that there's any?
There was also, Kervin, there's also another factor that was raised in the pleadings, and that was that there was a relationship between the Ms. Gunderson and some of the local police. She did babysitting for some of the police officers, detectives.
Yes, and we ventured into that on a previous show, I believe, with Shannon, where you told us that there was some real relationships going on between Marcy and some of the officers that were involved in the case, right?
Yes.
Do you want to just go through some of that for us again? We've got a lot of external noise coming through here. I'm not sure whether it's Keith or whether it's Shannon, but there is a lot of external noise. It sounds like somebody's driving and there's a lot of wind going on.
I'm having a reception problem, which I figured is going to happen here shortly. But I thank you all very much for allowing me to be a part of it. And my last thought was, I think the clearest theory of everything was that the mother had an anger problem.
Yeah, we are. I think we've lost you now. Hello.
Hello?
Okay, yeah, we're back now, I think.
Okay, there was evidence that the child was tossed there onto the gravel. I think that's what he was trying to say.
Yeah, and not just that. It looks like that was something that would have been done after Chris got home from work.
Yeah.
So, would it be fair to say, Mel? Would it be fair to assume?
That's not necessarily so, right? Because when I was doing the analysis for the submission to the state attorney, we took a very close look at the photos, and it would have been entirely possible for somebody to open the gate and go up the stairs without ever seeing where the body was found. It was away from the point of, when you come through, you look to the stairs to the right, not to the left of the landing where the body was found. So I'm not arguing, but I'm just saying that, there was the possibility.
Right.
So it's quite possible that the child could have been out there all the time, even when Chris came home from work.
Yes.
And the question would have to be, why would Gunderson leave the child out there? And was she hoping that Chris finding her would incriminate himself?
I can't really speculate in terms of that. My overriding feeling is that, certainly, Kervin, it's a natural instinct to try and solve the crime and identify what happened. But what we look to is there evidence that proves that the defendant who's serving time committed the offense? That's really the lens that we look at this by.
And it's actually quite possible that neither one of them committed the crime and the child died of accidental death.
I'm not ruling that out. I just, there's counter arguments about all that. But the fact that this is, the evidence against Chris was really paper thin and to support a judgment that has been visited upon him. And
I suppose that's the most important argument that we can have right now without trying to rip anything else apart, is looking at the evidence that convicted him and looking at how ineffective or the word I'm looking for is, you just cannot take it for granted that be the truth. It's so unreliable.
Right. And especially when you add in the stomach contents issue, which was never presented to the jury. That's a stunning situation.
Okay, we did want to go on, Shannon.
I'm sorry. I think the strongest evidence that it was not Chris, and most likely the mother, is that she admitted that she was feeding the child. She was basically force feeding to him. He didn't want to eat, and then that the forensic specialist and the toxicologist said the child died within minutes of eating because of the yogurt still being pink and gooey in the child's stomach.
Right. So was there a history of the mother mistreating the child?
Yeah.
There was a history. Was there a recordable history of the mother mistreating the child?
I was told yes. All three children.
And the authorities were aware that the mother had a history of mistreating the children.
Just 2 weeks earlier, before this happened, I forget if it was the 4-year-old or the 6-year-old, fell off of the roof of the house and had a similar injury and was in the hospital.
I think we need to you need to find a way to turn up your volume. Shannon, you're very low.
All the way up.
It's all the way up.
Maybe if I pull out from under this carport.
or get closer to the thing. I'm not sure, but your vocals are quite drowned by myself and Mel, unfortunately. And I do think you've got some important things to say here.
Is this any better?
Just keep talking, but let's not have no dead air. Let's just keep talking. So you were going to say about what was happening with the child 2 weeks prior to this accident?
It's just 2 weeks prior, one of the older children had fallen off of the roof and had similar injuries to their head and was in the hospital.
So the injuries that this young child died from, another child had similar injuries 2 weeks prior that were consistent.
Yeah.
And was that not raised during the trial or the appeal?
I don't know.
Mel? Hi, Mel?
Yes.
Was this issue of the other child having identical, if not similar, injuries 2 weeks prior to the death, was that not raised during the trial or the appeal?
It was it was not raised in either the trial nor the appeal.
And is there any understanding as to why that information was not deemed to be relevant?
Well, I don't know. I did not see any reference to it during the trial proceedings or an offer of that evidence by the defense and the court ruling on it. So I don't know why it was not presented. Now, there are some legal limitations on presenting what they call similar fact evidence. The court has to act as a gatekeeper on the admissibility of that kind of evidence.
So would that not have been prudent to use that sort of evidence to negate what was being said about Chris and the probability that he committed the crime when the autopsy showed that this was done by a heavy fall, and now you've got another child who's fallen from the window with similar injuries that makes it comparable at the very least?
It would have been in something that the jury would have been interested in. That's all I can say. The admissibility of it, though, is limited because of the rules about similar fact evidence.
I mean, even in a close court, if the judge had heard that, do you think the judge might have taken a different stance?
It's hard for me to speculate about what makes judges do things, but yes, it's possible that it could have played a role.
Shannon. Hi,
Yes.
Shannon. Can you just tell us, from your point of view, why you think Chris was not the type of guy who was able to commit this type of crime?
Well, number one, he's not violent. He's always been a guy he's the kind of guy that looks out for people. He's always looking out for people. Just like from prison, he's helped hundreds of other men and, with their cases and set several of them free. He's always looking out for other people. He's very thoughtful. Even with my children, I mean, he sends them little drawings and letters and, make sure he stays in contact with them as well. And he's always very extremely thoughtful and considerate and wanting to help other people. The last thing he wants to do is hurt anyone.
And you've known him since he was around 14. What type of kid was he as you were growing up? Were you in love with him back then, or was it just a youthful friendship?
Oh yes, I was totally in love with him. We were dating, and then my dad decided we were too young, and that's why we split up. But, his family moved, and my family moved, and we lost contact. There was no social media back then. But, when I think about him as a young kid in high school, it just makes me smile. He was always bubbly and happy and had a sparkle in his eye, always had great ideas. He's always been an idea kind of guy. I mean, even with law, he's constantly thinking of new ideas and how to do this and how to do that. He was just like that in high school as well. Very studious, involved in track and band, and he was always, just that guy that was on top of everything and doing the best he could in every aspect.
And then you guys were separated for many years. He went on to get married. Did you go on to get married as well?
He never got married, actually.
Okay.
But, yes, I did get married for a while, and that didn't work out. We're still friends, but we're not meant to be in a marriage. And I still kept trying to find Chris, and imagine my surprise and shock when I found him in prison.
Yeah, let's go to that. So when your marriage broke down and that didn't work anymore, how soon afterwards did you start looking for Chris again?
Well, I always had looked for him, and I had even told my ex-husband, I'd really like to know what happened to him, I said, I can't find him anywhere, and, I was always very honest with everyone around me about it. I didn't hide the fact that I always loved him, and I had always been looking for him.
So, there you are now, unmarried or not together with your husband, and you're searching for him. How did your search for him lead you to prison?
Well, when I was typing in his name on Google search, I found Free Chris Helton all over the internet. Free Chris Helton on Facebook, free Chris Helton on Google, free Chris Helton on YouTube, free Chris Helton. I was like, this can't be my Chris. And then I saw a picture on freechrishelton.org, and it was his face, and I was in shock. I am like, no way. Of all the people this could have happened to, what a tragedy.
So didn't you just think at that point, well, hang on a minute, if that's where he is, let me just do a quick about turn and I'll go in another direction. Why didn't that just put you off?
Because I knew him. I knew his heart. I mean, he's a romantic guy. He's a guy who's thoughtful and helpful. He's not someone who would commit a crime.
Okay, so the nature of the crime, the fact that it was a child involved, did that not just throw up any alarm bells? Did you not just think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, I don't need this, not in my life right now?
No, maybe on most people it would, but I knew him. The only thing that struck my heart was that this poor child, I love children. I mean, I have 6 of my own, and I just adore children, and I've always wanted a large family, and I've always taken care of other people's children as well. My heart is for children, so my heart just felt like it was bleeding for this child and what he must have went through that night, but never once did I question Chris.
Mel, if you're still there, are you still there, Mel?
Yes, I am.
Apart from the scenario which led to the young child's death, what was the relationship reported like between Chris and the child during his relationship with the child's mother?
It's very interesting. The mother reported that Chris and the child did not get along, although Chris testified the exact opposite.
Was there any corroborating evidence or testimony from anybody else to support one or the other?
None whatsoever.
I mean, you would imagine if they lived in a community would be able to see. I mean, sometimes, you see a parent who's often, or you can see a parent chastising their child on an off occasion, or you can see if you lived in a community, you'd see that parent often shouting at that child. You would see that child and parent often having arguments or indifferences. Surely in a case as serious and significant as this, an investigation into the relationship between this man and a stepchild, so to speak, would have been a significant line to take.
Well said.
Just to establish.
Well said, Kerbin. Yeah. There was no investigation in that regard. I do not know. When police make an arrest, and they made an arrest within a few days, it generally they move on to the next case in the state system. They don't continue the investigation. I don't see any evidence of anybody investigating that angle on the side of the prosecution, and on the defense side. I did not see any reports indicating that had been investigated.
The lines of investigation to get some clarity seems to really be very little. There seems to be no investigation whatsoever, and just an acceptance of what the version of what the mother's given, without any real investigation into either one of them, so to speak, to get to the truth. A thorough investigation of both potential suspects, and they should have both been treated as suspects at the beginning, until such time as evidence was brought back that suggested one or the other or both had nothing to do with the child's death. But it appears...
Kerbin, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It makes good, logical sense. It represents intellectual balance. The emotions that are at work in a situation like this when it's first unfolding, accusing a mother of killing her child is a monstrous accusation, and I think it's, I don't know what level that had to do with the reticence to really investigate hard and deep and objectively. There is this question about the relationships between the local constabulary and the mother. So, I can look at, hear what you're saying, and I wish that it had been done and had been done thoroughly. This is the difference between what we desire in a justice system, what we expect in a justice system, and what happens when human emotion and human foible gets involved in the process of execution. So
I have an interesting tidbit. Chris has been in prison with both of her other children. Now, if they thought he was a danger to her children, they would not have put them in there with him. But he's been in there with both of her other children, and they get along fine.
What are they incarcerated?
They were, yes.
Okay. And so therefore, if there was a problem between them and even they thought that he was guilty, there would have been some sort of revenge attacks at the very least?
They wouldn't have put them in the same prison.
I get that. I get that totally, Shannon. On top of that, flipping here and there and going all over the place because we've had to, obviously, because of the way that the show has gone. This DNA evidence that they refuse to allow to be entered in as evidence of her blood on the stone and the pea gravel, etc. Tell me some more about that, Mel.
Well, Chris and I worked long and hard on that petition because you do have to justify for the court to order that kind of testing to be done. And we put together a very lengthy analysis of the facts that we hoped to be able to prove by DNA analysis. And the judge that rejected the application wrote a very lengthy opinion. Now, another option might be if we approach them again about us paying for the cost of the testing, we may be able to get some DNA testing. But what I know about DNA testing is the items that we could test are not necessarily easy to find DNA on. So yeah. Unfortunately, the courts sort of and Chris litigated this himself. I think I may have handled the appeal on the state side, and then I think he filed a civil rights action to try and force the DNA testing. So it's been thoroughly litigated, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to get much traction on it.
I mean, the reality of this all is that there is several avenues, several important, significant bits of information and evidence that has just been dismissed and not even looked at. But yet you've got a serious, heinous offence of a young child's life, sadly taken at such a young age, and the potential, possibly, probably, innocent man sentenced for a crime that he didn't commit, and no one can be bothered to get to the truth. Or not no one can be bothered. Those that have the power to are not allowing the truth to be properly or appropriately investigated. That's what it appears to me as an outsider looking in.
Well, I understand your thinking, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. But when I'm dealing with these kinds of issues, I try and focus on the facts and hope that the people on the other side will hear me. I can't very well voice opinions about whether they're being objective or not. it's not helpful to the process.
I hear that. I hear that. For somebody that's worked alongside several miscarriages of justice over here in the UK in particular, and I've been doing these shows now on wrongful convictions for over 3 years now, and I never fail to be surprised at the sheer incompetence and inability of the justice system to support when factual evidence that could free somebody who's been innocently jailed becomes available. Let's look at where we are now. Where are we now, Mel, as far as the campaign to free Chris Shelton is concerned?
Well, as Keith explained, there are limits, to what we feel free to talk about. I'm working on a completely different vein of information and in a completely different direction than Keith is. He is helping with regard to the parole proceedings and the procedures that were used to deny Chris a parole, which we all felt very strongly that he should have received as a way of correcting this injustice, and based upon his impeccable behavior while in custody. To make 25 years in custody without having a disciplinary report is almost unheard of. And Chris did. He did very well. So there's an effort being made. There's a pending case in the circuit court in Leon County, which is where the parole board, it's no longer called a parole board, but for our purposes, that's what we'll call it, where it is located, and the court has jurisdiction on a case. Chris wrote the petition himself in that court, and it's being revised with the assistance of a lawyer who has volunteered to help him. And Keith is also very involved in that process. So they're working on it, and a very, very capable attorney is helping him. In terms of what I'm doing, I'm trying to think globally about where we can go next with Chris's case and see if I can get some exoneration for him.
Let me just read an email Chris sent me recently. Okay, I've just got to get it up. Okay, no, that's not the one I want. Bear with me a second.
Sure.
Okay, here it is. He says, I do not know that if you've had the extreme misfortune of having experienced prison yourself, but I am sure that you encountered a number of wrongfully convicted individuals, as well as a few actually innocent people. Wrongful convictions and the incarceration of actual innocent people are not uncommon, nor are they isolated to this country. For me, entering our country jail and then our state prison system, despite my actual innocence, I was determined to use time, education and skills to free myself and as many other similarly situated individuals as possible, having, as one Florida attorney, much like a barrister, noted, remarkable success. After all, I have had my own conviction vacated twice, once in a state court and another time in federal court, only to remain here in state prison for another 18 years and counting, just because an attorney failed to ensure a timely filing of my federal habeas petition after exhausting my state court remedies, while helping an extraordinary number of people seek and secure relief for themselves. I am not your typical jailhouse lawyer, nor am I your typical inmate law clerk, one certified and assigned by state prison officials to assist fellow inmates with their multitude of legal issues. No, while incarcerated, I successfully completed the professional paralegal certificate program at the State University of New York College and at Old Westbury in Old Westbury, New York, the legal investigation certificate program at the State University of New York, Stony Brook University in Stony Brook, New York, and the advanced paralegal certificate program in Staten Island, New York. Upon my release, I am hopeful that I will have an opportunity to continue to helping the wrongfully convicted and actually innocent in a more effective manner, and thus you and your friends and listeners have many shared interests and goals. For now, you and your friends and listeners can be supported by simply downloading the free JPay app and conversing with me about virtually anything under the sun, including what they may be able to do to help me free me, signing an online petition to free or sending an email or two to key decision makers, taking and posting photos of them holding up free Chris Helton signs, etc. Indeed, we have a prosecutorial review in progress right now, as well as some civil litigation pending in a state court, making the continued support from others throughout the world, including you and your friends and listeners, an important factor in whether I end up securing some much needed and well-deserved relief. That was an email, just one of the few that I've received from Chris, especially since I've been communicating him over the last few weeks. And when you read the content of what he's written and the selfless way that he continues to help others, even in the midst of his own adversity, you can't help but feel for a man who's spent 25 years plus in prison for a crime he quite obviously, by the evidence that's laid before us, could not have committed. And yet here he is, still not just looking for himself, but still, even upon his release, looking to continue the work to support and free others. I mean, that just speaks volume of the character of the man, doesn't it, Mel?
Certainly does. It's very inspiring, the way he's managed to maintain his balance.
What are we doing going forward, Shannon, in helping the Free Chris campaign gain some more momentum?
What I really need help with, well, there is the holding up the Free Chris Helton signs and sending them to me on Facebook. There's a Facebook Free Chris Helton. I mean, those are good for social media, but the serious thing we need help with is to lobby Congress for a change. Chris is not the only one stuck on a procedural technicality and so forth. We need to lobby the Congress, and here I am. I'm working 10-hour nights and sleeping in the day, and then I have my children, and I'm not able to do everything that I need to do. I need like a year of being paid while I don't have to work so I can do this. But there needs to be a change. I went to the CRC meeting, which is the Constitutional Review Committee. They had a meeting that they have only once every 20 years to try to change some laws. And I went to this meeting. There were so many people there. You would have thought that a celebrity event was happening. And they asked people not to clap because there were so many people that wanted to be heard. But after I talked about Chris's case and everything that's happening, I got an applause. So I thought that was pretty neat that the people were supporting me even when they were asked not to be clapping. But the people need, this whole system needs to change here with this parole situation, and Chris has filed suit against the parole, as we have spoken about, and so that's where we're at this moment.
And what's Chris's mindset like at this current time, having faced all of this adversity and setbacks over the years?
He's really amazing. Sometimes I call him my Superman. He's very solid in the mind, and he's always working on somebody's law case and trying to help someone, and trying to help even things around the prison with fixing the TVs when they break down and little things like that. But at the same time, when we're sitting, visiting with each other, he said, I am so tired. I'm just so tired. I just want to come home. And when I look at his fingernails, he's got these really deep indents in his nails from all the stress that has happened to him over the past 27 years. He's just tired. He's still pushing on, but he's tired.
Mel, how are you managing to keep his spirits up in this time now? Because you obviously are communicating by phone and etc.
Well, training, I've been practicing for 50 years, so I understand the long view, and you just keep on trying and pushing and trying to find an opening. So it's what I've learned to do, and I certainly like working with somebody like Chris because he's very stable emotionally, and dealing with clients who are having trouble accepting certain facts or speaking objectively about facts or dealing with deadlines. Let me tell you, it can be a miserable experience if the client doesn't have insight into what's going on in the process or doesn't have the emotional stability to be able to work with it. So, I'm tired too.
Yeah.
This is long. I've had a few cases in my career that have lasted a long time, and this is certainly one of them, one of the longest.
Out of these cases that you've had that have lasted a long time, how does this rate as far as the ludicrous way in which they've ignored relative evidence that could have set him free ages ago?
This one is it stands out. It certainly is an extreme situation, and when I'm in the weeds working on a specific aspect of it, I don't think about it in those terms. But when I look in the big picture, this is really kind of shocking to my conscience.
Yeah.
That a man could be incarcerated for as long as Chris Helton has, when all the evidence points to his innocence, and having had these verdicts turned over twice, once by state and another by federal, and to still find himself behind bars, gone past his parole date and still behind bars, relative evidence available yet ignored and still behind bars, and information that is likely to suggest that the perpetrator, the person that actually committed the crime, is a lot closer to home than the authorities would like to admit, and yet he's still behind bars. It must be the most discouraging place for an individual to find themselves, and we're all aware of individuals who have been incarcerated and have ended up taking their life because they're convinced that they'll never see freedom. But Chris Helton has used his time behind bars in a very productive and positive way, uplifting and inspiring many others, as well as leading them to their own freedom, while he continues to suffer at the hands of the judicial system. I mean, if that man doesn't deserve some sort of award, medal, Nobel Peace Prize by the time he's finished, I don't know who does. But I think we all take our hats off to Chris Helton right now, and we plead with people and individuals to continue to hold up the free Chris Helton signs up, take photographs and post it, whatever country or place that you are at. Look at all the local sites where you can see it on Facebook and social media. Send them to Shannon Helton, and she'll make sure that they get posted. But I would want to just leave the last words with you, Shannon. If somebody wanted to help Chris get free or be heard, what can they do to help, and where can they find you all?
I am on Facebook. Well, obviously my name is Helton, and I'm connected to the free Chris Helton group, so you'll know it's the correct Shannon Helton, and my husband and I are my profile picture. You can also find Free Chris Helton on Twitter. There is also the freechrishelton.org site. We're having some technical issues. We need to update it, and it's not letting our password work, so we've got to figure out how to get through this and get it updated. But we also do have the freechrishelton.org site.
And Mel, looking at the work that's been done to bring this back into the forefront of a core judiciary system somewhere, how far off are we from that process?
you're talking about the next steps that we're going to be taking.
Yes.
I'd say we're within a couple of months of finding out whether we're going to be able to get some traction in the stuff I'm working on. And what Keith is working on, I don't know their time frames. I know it's an extraordinarily work-intensive event that they're involved in. And, I have to tell you, I wish Chris was still on the line so his ears would burn a little bit. It is amazing, I understand the limits on what a lawyer can do, how much time in the day there is to do the work that we do. The law always is begging for more time. I remember when I first entered law school, we were told that the law wants all your time like a jealous mistress. And that's the way we call the law, the jealous mistress. So when Chris is extraordinarily productive in his output and his writing he's very productive. And when he filed his pleading, the amount of work that went into that was monumental, the case involving the parole commission. And then I felt like, well, this is going to require a real push to get that one over the finish line. And lo and behold, he managed to enlist. And I think that it was Shannon that reached out to a lawyer in Miami who was in a very prominent law firm who had known Chris way back when his case was in the public defender's office and had known about Chris. And he volunteered on a pro bono basis to work on the case, and he enlisted Keith. That was part of it, that he would have Keith involved. And it's like we just doubled our forces when they came along. So, it's really kind of it's heartening for me to realize that there are other people joining to do the work that has to be done.
Well, again, all we can say is a continual thank you for the hard work that you're doing in supporting Chris. Those that are, even though we're meant to sit on the sidelines and are meant to be unbiased and just facilitate these meetings, I can't help but get involved and I'm passionately committed towards supporting this particular campaign and doing whatever I can to support Shannon and yourselves in getting this before the judiciary so that we can see Chris come home to his family sooner rather than later. Too soon ain't soon enough. And so we really wish you all the best from here in the UK. We'll continue to support, publicise and advertise anything to do pertaining with the campaign to free Chris Helton, and anything that we can do to support Shannon in her pursuit of getting Chris home. We'll do whatever we can. But I want to leave the last words on this particular show, because we've just about come up to the end, with Shannon. Whatever message you want to send out to the public before we close the show, the platform is all yours.
Well, I would like to say also, if anyone would like to send messages to Chris, are welcome to do that. You can do that through the JPEG. It's Chris Helton. His DC is 864-458. I'm sure he would love to hear the support directly from you. You can also, as I mentioned, contact me through Facebook or Twitter or the freechrishelton.org. We appreciate any support, every support. We would love to get a celebrity on board that would help us get his name out there and get some recognition, like Kim Kardashian just did for Alice Johnson. She got her freed through Trump. That would be amazing to have something like that happen.
Well, we will continue to support you in all your efforts to bring Chris home. And Mel, I just want to thank you for all your hard work and your committed years of supporting Chris. And let's just hope that the work that's ahead will be fruitful and bring Chris home real soon.
I really appreciate the pep talk, Kerbin. You've been wonderful, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you very much, guys. That's all we've got time for tonight. Freedom calls. It's the Free Chris Helton campaign, and Chris needs to come home. He's got a wife that loves him. She misses him badly, and although they married while he was incarcerated, they really want to get back into that place where they were when they were so young and in love, when he was 14 and around that time. They've got a lot of time to be making up and catching up on, and we want to see that happen sooner rather than later. Mel, thank you very much, and Shannon, once again, you've been a superb guest, and we thank you for all the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you both.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We're out of here.
Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 118. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month.
Reggae dancehall by the beach.
At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
One, two, three, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ, or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday, or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448, or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets, and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're my World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
This is Younger General, and you can listen to the Younger General's Mix by Mix show each and every Thursday between the hours of 7 and 9 on the World Jam Global. Listen.
World Jam Global.
Hi, my name is DJ Matt. Join me each and every Sunday for the old school reggae experience, the thing we call
The Time Tunnel.
between the hours of 12 and 3 each and every Sunday, all right, on the big one.
World Jam Global.
It's inspiring and uplifting, and it feels good to my soul. I start my Sunday mornings listening to Dr. Feel Good's Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show, exclusively on World Jam Global Radio, where music is harmony.
World Jam Global Radio, this is clarity.
Well, that's enough for me today.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time.
That was the Free Chris Helton Show. Freedom Calls.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time.
Next week, I've got Tracy Knight.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women.
Tracy Knight's son, Lawrence Graham, was shot twice in the back by police.
I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about beating no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope.
We're talking about unlawful killing.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could